So now we're about to begin. I'm going to play a short video.
In his mighty fortress, Prince Adam transforms into He-Man.
I have the power!
And now it's He-Man versus the evil Skeletor. Skeletor alone is no match for He-Man. But there's the ferocious fangs of Panther. Scratch that, He-Man's got Battle Cat. Now it's a fight with bite and a mass of missiles. That was close, but He-Man's mighty sword is closer. So long, Skeletor. New He-Man, Skeletor, Battle Cat, and Panther figures each sold separately.
I don't remember that commercial.
Wait.
at all.
I actually, I'll fill you in on something right away that just struck me as I watched that spot. Did you see where the wall came down? That's my finger. that is that finger. Because the kid that was there kept fumbling it. I was like, come on. I was like, I can do this. I know I can do this. They're like, we're gonna give you one take. I was like, all right, bam.
That's the highlight of the commercial.
Yeah.
The rocks falling.
Yeah.
So I should probably introduce everybody. I'm supposed to also read you this description of the panel so that the folks at home know what this is about. So 15 years ago, Mattel relaunched Masters of the Universe with a new and exciting assortment of toys that inspired a resurgence of fanatics that continues to this day. Relive memories and perhaps learn new secrets about the 2002 Masters of the Universe toys with the people who helped make it a reality in the 2000X Masters of the Universe action figure adventure panel. That's a run-on sentence. So I'm going to introduce the panelists. We have Jeremy Padawer, who was a marketing and brand manager at Mattel from 2001 to 2003. And then we have Cornboy, Jim, and Eric of Horsemen Studios, who've been the toy designers of Masters of the Universe since about 1999. So what I'd like to do first is to kind of go back in the time machine and talk about a little bit about how you got started working with Mattel and kind of narratively what your involvement was in the development of Masters of the Universe. I'm going to start with Jeremy, but I kind of want to go back a little bit further with Jeremy because you kind of have an interesting background in toy collecting and you were an internet entrepreneur, and that kind of feeds into that story about how you got into Mattel. So if you could share that with everybody, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, let's see. So I always just wanted to do the things that I understood. And one thing that I understood was collectability. As a kid, I collected everything: stamps, baseball cards, autographs, He-Man. I mean, I collected all kinds of stuff. So specifically, however, I remember collecting Star Wars action figures and then wrestling them because LJN hadn't produced their 1983 line of WWE figures yet. So I would look. Nowadays, kids have it a little bit easier because pretty much everything is at their fingertips. But back then, we had to make do, right? So in a sense, I understood collectability. I created a series of online websites where you could buy and sell product through really, really, arcane guest books, like in the mid '90s. And but people would come into those websites to because there was no other choice. I mean, it was just so early. But what I learned was to really connect with the consumer. And I learned how important that was, and that the fans of these brands were bigger than the brands themselves. And I think that people didn't really get that yet. So by the time I got to Mattel, that was pretty much my whole philosophy. Was like, your brand is important, but the people are more important. And in a sense, that sort of sums up my getting there. I got recruited. I was in doing academic stuff while balancing entrepreneurial stuff. And that sounds really heady and exciting, but really I was a broke, student loaned out person that really lucked out. Great timing on the internet stuff, and then by the time I got to Mattel, I had a lot of self-esteem. So that was a terrific situation in that regard. But when I started Mattel, I was on Hot Wheels, and I told them right away, it was such a big machine that I wanted to be involved with something that was more intimate and was a real direct consumer engagement. And so when I had the opportunity to switch over to He-Man, it was like a dream come true. And essentially, I think we can get it more into that, but I don't want to take up all the time, so I'll pass it on.
Well, for us, we were working at another toy company. We had always been into toys and action figures. Eric, in particular, was a gigantic He-Man fan back when he was a kid. And even before we left the company that we were working for to form our own company, for Horsemen Toy Design, we had talked ad nauseum. If we were to ever be able to go back and revamp and relaunch a toy line, what would it be? And it was He-Man and the Masters of the Universe every time we talked about it. There were other ones that we talked about as well, but that was number one to us. And it just so happened that we had a friend who was in the toy industry. He worked for Fisher-Price, who was owned by Mattel, and he put us in contact with somebody at Mattel, and we had come to a point at the company that we were working with that it was time for us to move on and start kind of doing our own thing. They were moving towards more statuesque figures and moving into areas like sports and military and things like that we weren't necessarily interested in. We want toys you can play with. We want to make toys that are fun and exciting and monsters and superheroes and stuff. So we had decided that we were going to be leaving this company, but what were we going to do? And at that point, Mattel just happened to be looking for a design company outside of Mattel that could handle doing work for them. And we talked to them. They said, hey, come on out. Let's have a meeting. Let's sit down and talk. So we gathered together a bunch of prototypes, and we went out to California to meet with Mattel. And we'd never done anything like this before. And we thought, this is Mattel, largest toy company on the planet. We got to look good. We went out there wearing suits and ties, carrying briefcases and stuff. We looked like the New Jersey Mafia walking through, because we were walking past in the parking lot, past the loading docks out back, and people are outside from Mattel taking breaks. They were in like cargo shorts and like Hawaiian shirts and stuff, and here we're in these black suits, and we looked all dangerous and tough. And we walked in, and
it was 17 years ago.
yeah, yeah, little looser now. So we met with some of the guys at Mattel, and they liked the prototypes that we had brought. And at the end of the meeting, they were like, "This is great. You know, we really want to work with you guys," and we really wanted to work with them as well. And they were like, "What did you guys have in mind?" And I said, "Well, our number one priority is we would love to revamp and redesign He-Man and the Masters of the Universe and launch it for a new generation." And they're like, "That's crazy. That's exactly what we were thinking. That's why we wanted you guys to come here." And it just fell into place. It was just pure dumb luck, right timing, and we met the right people.
We wanted to impress them as well. That's the reason why I wore like cut-off jeans and like a straw hat that
They
day.
were the short shorts, though, so it was very impressive.
Okay, so I thought what we would do is show some concept stuff that was from the Dark Horse books of things that were never produced as action figures. Some of them don't even have names, and I thought we could maybe talk about these concepts a little bit. So let's start.
Well, one of the things that has always been part of Masters of the Universe has been the variants of the main characters. And unfortunately, Mattel wanted to go even further down that well with the new line. We were interested in getting all the characters out. But there was a lot of work done on He-Mans and Skeletors. And quite a few got made, but as you can see here, there were ones that did not.
All four of these designs were by Eric, by the way. Very cool designs.
So we've actually, that second one, that got made?
That got
I
made.
think that did.
Yeah, that did. Okay.
And we actually have a prototype of the third one from the left there, two from your left. That's our Horde Buster He-Man that never got made. We have a solid prototype for that was never released.
Yeah, the shield opened up into this big giant shield. It was based off of the Ice Armor He-Man figure. That's out of those. That's the heartbreaker out of the bunch.
Yeah, he looked really cool.
Yeah, and then the one on the end, the far end was just a flight pack He-Man, so that he could interact with Stratos.
And the one on this end, if you guys were at the documentary thing last night, that's Seaman on this end. Not really.
The Horde Buster armor He-Man is always a big thing that comes up. Since you guys have a prototype of that, would you be willing to share that with us on the board after the panel? Would you be able to get photos of that and be able to share it?
We'd have to find all the pieces.
Yeah, see if we can dig it out, because it's in
But-
multiple boxes in the back. We've been through a move, not just a move from one studio from the other, but from different areas of that new studio to the other. So we'll
At
see if
some
we can dig 'em
point,
out.
if we can get the pieces together, that's a good little reveal to bring out at some point. It is a cool figure, because that Ice Armor He-Man's a big, bulky version of He-Man in the first place, with the fur boots and everything. And with that armor on top of it and the giant shield, it's probably the most imposing He-Man figure that we had done on that line.
And
And
he
then-
has like the big metal collar up around his neck, so I don't know what. So Hordak couldn't bite his neck or what?
Maybe. I think the
Hordak was kind
idea
of
was
vampiric.
after the Snake Men, the Horde had to be bigger and even more of a threat than the Snake Men, and they were these wild, bizarre creatures, and so to reflect that, He-Man really had to step up his game to combat those forces.
Especially with the metal loincloth.
That's right. Mantena played dirty.
So we have a scorpion guy, unnamed scorpion guy.
And he was unnamed. We didn't have a name for him internally, but the basic idea behind this guy was simply that the Masters Universe designs, they pick an iconic theme or creature and just run with it, basically. I mean, Merman's a fish guy. Beastman is kind of a gorilla beast guy. Stratos was the air character. So a scorpion was just a great creature that had never been really touched upon in figure form. And, he's got a combination of some of the cooler villains. He's got a big tail like Whiplash. He's got giant claws like Clawful had, but in a combination that hadn't been seen before. And we wanted to do this guy in a kind of a glossy black color scheme, which also we felt was going to stand out from some of the other characters in the line. But he remains a concept.
Is
It'd be
he
cool if we could do him with Super 7, though. If fans might, I don't know if fans would be into it or not, but we'll talk to the powers that be. If you guys are into it, maybe we will.
Do you have a faction association for him? Is he an evil warrior or a member of the Horde or?
He was an evil warrior.
Okay.
This guy was called Blubor.
Bloodborne.
In the
That's what He-Man looks like now,
In his retirement.
after 17 years.
Yeah, and the idea with this guy was that the torso, that kind of backpack piece, was going to be a hard plastic piece that was going to run down the back that would provide structure for the articulation and for it to hold its form. But the head and the stomach were going to be molded in a very soft, gushy plastic, possibly filled with a liquid, so that they're very much like the Blob and X-Men. You could take your He-Man figure and have him, go attack him and then sink into his giant gut. And there was a color version of him. He was a bright orange figure, and the little spots were yellow.
I posed for the concept drawing of that.
It was a fun session. I don't remember. I don't know that he. I mean, it was such an early design that it never even got that far. I don't even know if our intention was that he was heroic or evil. I mean, I said He-Man was going to fly into him, but that may not have even necessarily been the case.
Oh, this is a good time to remind everybody. I'm supposed to tell you that if you would like to ask a question, to please step up to the microphone so the audience can hear you and that they can get it on the video recording. And feel free to step up with your questions anytime. Like, we are going to try to put time aside at the end for questions, but if you have a question now, it's your panel, so ask it now. So you can just step up to the microphone. We'll take them in real time. Oh, this character had a description. He was described as a skull-faced minion of Skeletor that was based partially on Imp. Would somebody like to tell us more about the concept of that character and kind of how that fit into the story?
He wasn't. I don't know about the imp part. The idea with this guy was that we wanted a nemesis for Orko. With 2002, we were looking to make Orko a little less comical and more of like a little mage type character that actually possessed some sort of a threat level. Still a comedic character, but something that fit with the overall feel of the line a little better. And so we just thought it would be cool for Skeletor to have a similar type character to go up against Orko.
Question.
Yes. I guess I'd like to ask each member of the panel what their favorite figure or achievement was from this line. And also, because of the history and all the fans being, and you being a fan coming to the line, was there any additional steps that you guys did to archive or make sure to document the work that you guys were doing?
So, look, it was funny when you were what did you call it, Blubor? What was it called? When you were talking about Blubor, I was thinking about Moss Man, just because from a manufacturing perspective, it was cool to do something a little bit unique and different. So that's probably my favorite character. But in terms of archives, Mattel is like a vault. So if you're working within the walls of that place, getting something out of there is like getting something off the Titanic. It's just very difficult. So there wasn't a lot of archival stuff that I ended up getting my hands on. These guys would have a very different perspective because they had the hands-on ability to create, which was great.
It's strange because normally my favorite types of characters are the big, gigantic, bulky, monstrous character. The Thing from Marvel Comics is my favorite character of all time. So I always gravitated towards like characters like Beastman and Clawful and some of the big, beastly, burly characters. But out of this line, I really like Trapjaw. I love that gigantic mechanical arm that Eric designed, and I got to jump in and fabricate that thing. That's probably my favorite character out of the line. As far as like archiving and documenting stuff, I mean, we have stacks and stacks of papers, design sketches and rough stuff like that that's just kind of in boxes. And then as we were just saying about the Horde Buster He-Man, yeah, we have a lot of prototypes, but they're all in pieces in boxes, and there's not like, we don't have them in a safe locked away anywhere. So we weren't really thinking that we would need to keep this stuff and document it. And I don't know why we weren't thinking that way, but we definitely have, all the old molds that we used and a lot of casting pieces. We still have a lot of that. It's just digging through it and organizing it and putting it back together again, I guess.
In other words, they have millions and millions of pieces of collectibles.
Lots of little tiny pieces, too.
As far as a favorite character, I'm a little bit older, so I didn't grow up with Master Universe. So when we go to these panels, that's always the question that's asked, what's your favorite character? And that's kind of a work in progress for me as far as who I need to come up with. But usually, as we went through the years of the Master stuff, it was always the one we were working on at the day. I didn't really have any kind of, tight connection to one figure or the other. But, as you would see something be developed, you kind of like, wow, that's really cool and it's nice and stuff. And then the next one will come along. So, as far as that goes, I'm gonna have to work on that one. So maybe next year I'll come up with I'll have a favorite.
His favorite's Bo.
But as far as the archiving of the stuff, and like Cornboy said, for us it was a day-to-day work thing, So you didn't, and it's kind of weird because people would be like, oh my God, I would kill to have this or kill to have that. But the reality of it for us was space, and like we said, we moved from one place to another, and this 40-foot dumpster came in, and we had 10, 12 years of molds that were deteriorating and stuff, and was like, what's got to go? What's and so yeah, I mean, we've got tons of boxes of stuff, and maybe that's a retirement issue to try to, sort through that stuff and see what you can come up with. But for the most part, for people like us, it's just memories, like what you don't really have to have all that stuff. You experience that. You have the memories. You remember the old stories, the old, when we would get together at Comic-Con or these places or meetings and stuff like that. So that's our, or at least for me, that's my archive.
Well, we actually did, like early on when we first started, we tried to archive things, but like Jim said, it did become like a day-to-day thing. We actually
We had
the
we
first
had a showroom.
Yeah, we had
you
a
know?
showroom, and like whenever we did prototypes for Mattel, we always did one tooling pattern and two paint masters. And one of their paint masters was for it changed throughout the years, but in the beginning, one of the paint masters would be for the factory to do the production, and the other paint master would be for them to take around to shows or to keep there in their offices or whatever. And often, early on, we made a third paint master as well to put in our studio and to have on display there. And after a while, things just got so busy that there was no way we were going to be able to make a third paint master as well as get all the other work done that we had. So that just kind of went by the wayside. And after a while, we just had a bunch of unpainted gray two-up castings that had never been painted. And after that, it just became, we just didn't have time to do that third one at all anymore. So we just we had early plans to kind of archive things just to have our own display of stuff, but it just kind of ended.
So would they just turn it over to Hong Kong for the paint application?
Yeah.
You guys would provide the detail.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was, we were on to the next figure, and it was ultimately more important to sculpt the next figure for you guys to get and to get out on the shelves.
Oh
and
yeah,
keep-
because at
keep the
that
line
time you were
going.
doing all the paint masters.
Yeah,
Eric-
I was taking the 2-ups home at night and watching TV and painting paint masters.
Yeah, 90% of the paint masters early on in the Masters of the Universe stuff, Eric was doing that as well as sculpting a bunch of them too. So, yeah, it became a lot of work all at once.
I was a lot younger back then. that was a while back.
He was 6'3" at the time.
I think I was taller back
Yeah,
then.
you may have
I've
been.
shrunk already.
So this question kind of piggybacks off of that one. It's kind of the inverse. Is there a figure you would do differently today, and how?
You should start with that
Jesus.
because you didn't get to finish your answer. Your favorite.
Oh, well, my favorite, probably out of what was produced, was Whiplash, as far as how, from concept to production piece, but a big deal for me with the line was finally getting that card back merman head on the figure. That's probably the biggest triumph in the line. To go back and change things, the sword, just because it was such a controversial element. It was fine. It worked better with what our concept for what the line was going to be, but what it ended up with, our goal is not to upset people. We're trying to make figures that everybody likes. Design-wise on the characters, though, I mean, with the things that we came up with, not so much. I mean, the biggest regrets were the things that focus groups and Mattel interference when it came into play, because the fact that the articulation was pulled out was very disappointing to us, and some of the changes, like the He-Man with the more anime hair, and some of the paint applications that actually happened in production. Just anything that, we had a very specific vision for what we thought the line should be, and a lot of it made it through, especially with the secondary and tertiary characters. But there was too many cooks in the kitchen on a lot of the early development. So that's probably what, if I had the chance, I'd go back and try to course correct that a little bit.
Do you have anything to add to that, Jeremy?
Well, so,
Before he says it, by the way, Jeremy was not part of that issue. Just so you know.
He didn't put the stilts on He-Man and
Well, I was gonna say, yeah, so-
platform shoes.
perhaps just on a more macro level, when you're managing an action figure brand from the manufacturing standpoint, you really should never achieve the demand. You should always be under demand, because if you're under demand, it means you get another at bat. You get to do another wave. You get to do more figures. And one of the biggest challenges that you have at a big company, and it's not Mattel specifically, is that you have to be optimistic about what that next wave was going to be, or at least that was the philosophy close to 20 years ago. Now I think it's a little bit more collector driven. I would say that the one that I wish that we all could take back was Spinblade. Spinblade He-Man, because I think that singular item probably did more to damage the brand than any other single thing that was done. It was way over manufactured at the time. But ultimately, if you're not using the breadth of characters philosophy and you're over manufacturing even one wave, it puts the entire future in jeopardy. So breadth is critical, and never achieving demand is critical.
Question.
Yeah, talking about kind of like unreleased and kind of like, things that you never got to attain or achieve. How far along was Snake Mountain? Like, did you ever go through concepting? Where there's any kind of like engineering involved, anything like that?
Oh man. I recall seeing sketches. I recall seeing more than that, but I don't remember how far. Like, it may have been after me.
We weren't actually involved in any of the vehicles or play sets for the 2000 X stuff. So I don't think we even ever seen design sketches.
We
for
did do
Snake
some
Mountain.
concepting.
Had to have.
We did. It was a playset that was a combination of the cartoon version and the old toy, where if looked at it from the front, it looked more like the original toy, but rather than opening side to side, it flipped up top to bottom, so that then the back of it was the mountain with the snake on the top.
Right.
But I mean, it was a couple of sketches, and that was as far as we were involved.
And again, just to think of it from the company standpoint. So when you're developing a line, one of the biggest risks that you can take is the tooling costs of doing a big play set, right? So by the time that play set would have been concepting, there would have been a lot of awareness in terms of how the overall figure line was performing at retail. And I contend that He-Man, Masters of the Universe could have been around for many, many, many years if the philosophy had been breadth of characters and longevity. But it was really seen as a big tent pole event, and so if it wasn't going to be enormous, then it wasn't going to be. And unfortunately, that mindset, again, I think it's less of a mindset today, because I think there's more of a collector mentality, but that mindset is the type of thing that by the time you get to this, at the time probably $40 or $50 playset, now it might be $80 or $100 if you do it right. It's too much of a it's too much of an opportunity cost. It's too expensive, which is unfortunate, because I think it could have been awesome.
It was also, it was when it was being developed, it was very, very tail end of the line.
Right, that's right.
It was when some figures weren't making it to full retail. People were picking them up at groceries and things like that. So it was, the chances of it happening were so slim.
Right.
The only one that I'm aware of, vehicle or playset wise, that I ever saw anything 3D that wasn't released was there was some work done on a Wind Raider. It would, like, on the show, it was if I remember correctly, it was 2 seats wide. It was a much larger approach to the vehicle, but it was I don't even know if it ever got to the point where it was painted.
Question.
Yeah, I had 2 points to make, but you kind of stirred me off course. You said something very interesting, because I've been thinking about this. You're right, He-Man could have been going for many years, and I think where they kind of failed, they should maybe, and I don't think it's too late, maybe they should look at what Power Rangers and even Transformers is the best example, redefine themselves for a new generation. I think that's what keeps these franchises going. Because I mean, I remember watching the old school Transformers with my friend's son. He grew up with Beast Wars. It wasn't quite what we watched, but it kept Transformers, you know, in the mind. And now, what we got, 5, 6 movies. I mean, say what you want to say about it. It's out there in the public, and who knows? Had Mattel had done that, we could have been 4 or 5 Master of the Universe movies deep at this point. So. But point I want to say, were you the guys? Okay, I came in a little bit late. So you the guys who made the figures in early 2002? I saw at Comic Con.
Yeah.
The one where He-Man looked like Tony Hawk with the.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
I'm like, yeah. I was like, why he look so
Yeah,
young?
we're those guys.
My other point, have you ever
They
thought about
evolved. They evolved. I remained that.
Oh, okay.
I remained to that. I'll admit.
any other franchises, fantasy franchise you might want to do, like some off the beaten path? Like to me, I've never really had a definitive Conan the Barbarian 82 movie figure, especially when he had the war paint on. I want that so bad. Or has anybody ever thought about making an action figure of the Beastmaster? I mean, he was the dude with a sword and a tiger before He-Man. Just, I know there's got to be some love for the Beastmaster out there. So
I remember back when on HBO, that was the only movie they ever played. Every time you turned it on, it was Beastmaster.
Yeah. Clash of the Titans, maybe every other.
Yeah, they might have rotated a little bit, but yeah, I've probably seen that Beastmaster movie 50 times, and not necessarily because I wanted to.
I mean, I just
Figure-wise, though,
Yeah.
I mean that's such a niche that would probably. I mean, I could. Now is the time where it could potentially be done, and some companies are picking up such, one-shot licenses. So.
Kroll.
I would be more interested. I would be much more
Definitely.
interested in Krull. There's some really cool stuff in that. I think maybe you and I and 10 other people might buy it, but it would be cool.
Yeah. No, so today what I do is I co-own a toy company called Wicked Cool Toys, and this year we brought back Teddy Ruxpin, and next year we're taking over the Pokemon business globally outside of Asia. And it's a shock to me too. Trust me. But to what you were saying, and this is very different, okay? But Teddy Ruxpin was an enormous brand from 1983 to 1988, and it disappeared. And there's a whole panel behind that one day that we should, the 3 of you that want to know about that. That's right. That's right. But the point is, and what you're saying is, all you have to do is inspire some people from a generation that is emotionally attached to something. So you don't have to inspire the entire generation. All you have to inspire some. And once you inspire some, you sort of light that fire. And when that fire's lit, it can be absolutely explosive. So pretty much depending on the passion and the brains and the effort behind the brand that's being brought back, that's going to really be the key to the success. Because again, you inspire a few people from the prior generation, and they inspire their children. And it becomes way bigger than what it could have ever been before. So we're seeing great success with Teddy Ruxpin. It wasn't based on an enormous community online. It was based on the emotional connection that people had to the brand prior. And you renew that through their own children.
Now, when you talk about fantasy lines, there's some cool properties out there that we like to be involved with, but licensing isn't really our thing. So as far as fantasy, we're doing Mythic Legions, and to us, that's our fantasy, to be able to do something like that and do it the way we want to do it with no constraints. So Mythic Legions would be it.
Question.
So the 2000X line, I love the designs, and I get into online just debates regarding those designs versus the classics designs. And so there's always the pluses and minuses of each one. So I love both lines. I'm a big classics collector, but the 2000X, I think, had a good varying design around the builds of the characters, right? Some were bulky, some were thin, and I think that added to the plus of them. But I will say the one aspect that drives me nuts is the quality of the plastics. I have more broken 2000X toys than I have of vintage or obviously of classics. Who made the decision as to the quality of the plastics to be used for
So the way a giant company works
Yeah.
is that there are so many people that it's almost like it's unknown. I mean, it's probably someone on the sourcing team in Asia had the opportunity to sit down and look at various plastics, made the decision based on a weight being on the edge of a piece of plastic that didn't break, and then going down that path. I mean, the beauty behind a slightly smaller company is that person's often the same person that's heading up legal operations and everything else. So you just don't get it wrong. My recollection, and I can tell you, look, Mattel makes some very good product. So I wouldn't be able to tell you because I wouldn't know, and that person may have worked there for 8 months. And that's the reality. That's the reality. But hopefully, those things get course corrected over time. What did you guys think about that?
We didn't have anything to do with the choice of the plastics. I'm not taking the blame for that one.
I have to say, I mean, I never had any breaks
Yeah.
on any of the figures. I actually always felt that they were very solid figures.
There was like some issues with the classics with the green goddess, but that was because
The classics are great. It's 2000X.
But the 2000X,
Yeah.
like Eric was just saying, I never had any issues with breakage on any of those.
Do you have a video of you engaging with these figures so that we can see?
It wasn't me. It's my.
I'd like to see perhaps.
But yeah.
The
All I
use.
I handed him Triclops one day, and then I guess he's like, he walked in 10 minutes later. He's like, his visor fell off. So like what?
Well,
And
and,
he
there's
just-
so many figures made over the course of time too that it's possible you got a bad batch, or I just
That's
happened
true.
to get a good batch. There's so much that can go wrong in a production run of figures, and a lot of times, the factories will send you a perfect paint sample that's your last step of inspection before they go into production, and then they go into production and switch plastics or switch paints.
Right.
Or I mean, I'm sure that doesn't happen as much at Mattel because it's much more regulated, but those sort of things do happen. I mean, there was the time, I don't remember on what figures they were, but Mattel got in a lot of trouble years back because of the lead paint. And it was the same thing. It was not that Mattel, somebody's sitting there saying, oh, well, we can save a few dollars
Right.
if we use lead paint. It's that probably a subcontracted factory that was supplying paints to the main factory. It even potentially didn't even know that there was lead in the paint, or there's some trying to save a buck or two here or there, and there's just so many parts to the machine that there's the fact that figures come out the way that they do, as well as they do when they actually function, is somewhat of a miracle when you really stop and think about it.
Okay.
Plus it is, like you said, a machine that these steel tools, they wear out. And that's one of the things that we encountered, like all of a sudden, the joints of one line will be super tight. We always make sure, look, this has got to be super tight. But we're not over there constantly, and we're not taking every fifth one off the assembly line, and we just have to kind of like assume that these guys are monitoring that stuff. And occasionally, in the end of a run, maybe something might be a little bit loose or not glued exactly right or things like that. But we try to correct that the next time around, So, and I think Mattel is like probably, like Mattel and Hasbro, when it comes to safety and quality, that's the thing that they're on constantly, right? I mean, they make all the crazy other design screw ups and all the messed up things like that, but when it comes to safety and quality, I think that's where they hang their hat on, that you get a quality piece.
No, there's no doubt. Like I can tell you, just dealing with factories, there's the regulations that are governmental regulations, and then there's Mattel quality standards. And I haven't worked there in a long time, but I remember drive factories nuts. And what you said was exactly dead on. It could be a sub of a sub of a sub, and it's something that you would never know, because it's some third level down that should never be working on it in the first place. But what is there, a 99.99% chance that it would never get found out? So these factories will take a risk.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for the insights.
Thank you.
My turn. So I hope there's more concepts we can see, but since we're asking questions, you kind of touched on it, Eric, the sword. I was curious with the sword and the asterisks, was that more Horsemen's decision or Mattel's?
The asterisk was completely Mattel. All of our early, well, even some of the early He-Mans that came out had the cross, but you know, when we were first starting 2002. I mean, the way that we operate, it's based on instinct and just gut feeling. And I mean, there's obviously there's thought that goes behind it, but that's kind of the first reaction for us is you know, is it a cool figure? Does it look good? Is it true to the original figure? Are we hitting all the right notes here? And we got to Mattel, and the amount of research that was going on, I remember one of the specifics, they had a list where they were looking at what was going on in the news at the time that the original He-Man line came out. And they were looking at things like who won the World Series that year. And everything was so focus grouped and so overthought that, I mean, luckily, a lot of the way that we intended things did happen, but I mean, that's just another example where somebody probably in legal was so concerned that the cross was going to offend somebody or create some sort of controversy that even midway during a production run, they decided to retool and change it. So that's, you know, I remember that was a big, you know, a hot collector hunt early on, was to find the cross versions of He-Man versus the H versions of He-Man. I don't recall there being any complaints about that first version, but you know, just on the off chance, they went ahead and changed it.
I mean, my recollection of the time was that the objective with He-Man was it was a global brand. It was going to be a global launch. It was going to be something that if it wasn't in 75 countries, that would be a problem. And that was also, I remember at the time, like even the CEO said, this company it's one world. I even think they had an internal thing, like one Mattel at the time. And I even asked the CEO one time, raised my hand, you know, little kid in the audience, hey. And I said, will we ever develop product regionally? Because Max Steel in Latin America was like doing $50 million a year, like massive amounts of volume. And he looked at me and he said, no, we are a global company. So it doesn't make him right or wrong. In retrospect, I just think that, you know, the intimacy in these brands requires a little bit more tailor-made approach. And sometimes, you know, okay, so have two tools then. Have there be a North American version or whatever it may be, or do some more research and figure out that, you know, perhaps your sales will be up 37% here if you do certain things right. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was the fear. The fear was it was a global thing, and anything that can be perceived as religious can often shut you out of massive markets if it conflicts with the internal philosophy of that market.
Question.
Just
Sucks.
as kind of a follow-up on that briefly is on that topic, I kind of recall that in the concept art for the original Hero from 1987, that there was a G on his chest, right, for Grayskull, which was his working name. And then they changed it to an H because they decided, oh, you know, Hero tests better than Grayskull as a character name. Plus, there would be brand confusion. There's Castle Grayskull, there's a guy named Grayskull. It just doesn't make sense and it confuses kids. So, anywho, just, you know, the way things change as things are designed. But my question was, you know, conventions nowadays are really driven by the exclusive, right? Like, I can't even think of a small convention that can survive without one. And the first con exclusive I can recall was Keldor. I don't think there was anything before Keldor, like for any other brand.
I think
Maybe there
only the He-Man with the black wash on it, and I think it was a chromed
Yeah.
Well, it was also the statue.
Well, the
Yeah, the
statue-
statue
Oh,
was
the statue.
2000.
The statue.
But
That's a good
a
point.
I mean, that was $100 item.
That was the
Right,
first-
but
that was
other
the thing that
brands.
started-
I mean, Masters of the Universe did really.
That was the first
Started
time,
it.
even at
Yeah.
San Diego Comic-Con, when we sold
crazy.
that statue, there was a line around the Mattel booth twice
Yeah.
to get that statue, and that
I
hadn't
missed
been
it.
seen. Yeah, the people
Yeah.
at Comic-Con were like, they didn't even know what to do. They hadn't seen this before. And that's what kind of started. And then, like Eric said, I mean, like Jim said, yeah, it was a very premium item, but it started the exclusive thing. Other companies, including Mattel, said, we can make something out of this. Let's start doing exclusives. And you're right, I don't know of any conventions that don't have exclusives. I mean, it's just a thing.
And
You
then I think
expect it
the
now.
next year when that one He-Man with the gold sword came out, I think then that
Oh,
was also
mustard sword. Yeah.
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 Individually
yeah.
numbered.
I think that
Individually
was
numbered.
also the first fight over an
Yes.
exclusive that year.
That's right.
So I mean,
Oh, I think
Mattel was
somebody
really
got
making
trampled.
some history.
There was
So-
like
so our-
1,000 of them?
Yeah, our booth was a 10 by 10 booth.
That's
Let's
right.
just put this in perspective, okay, in terms of the scale and the size. And practically half that booth was stacked in the back with product. And there was no system that we had in the earliest year. There was no system
They
of
didn't expect it.
organization. I would say that no one expected it.
Yeah.
I mean, all we knew was that we had to schlep a bunch of product in, put it in the back, and stand there and accept everybody's bills. And you know, the big contribution was, let's make it $20 instead of $15, so we'd have to make change.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that was the mindset, right? You guys probably remember us like, oh, he's a
We're
genius.
dealing with that this year. The Mythic Legion stuff, it's like 2 figures for 40 or I mean, $40 each or 2 for 75. And now we're kicking ourselves in the butts because we gotta get a bunch of 5s
Yeah.
for change in the
Oh,
morning.
yeah.
What a nightmare.
The change is a pain in the ass. But what happened was, so it starts, and you like hear like rumbling in the background. You're like, oh, this can't be good. Like you hear like a stampede, and then you start seeing like some of the more athletic people in the front like running towards the booth, and you're like, oh, someone's gonna die, and it may be me. And so by the time they got there, all I remember is hearing this, my knee, and I was like, we're all fired. We're all fired. This lady had completely tweaked her knee. She's on the ground. She by the way ended up with like 3 of the numbered figures, but it was an eye opener to everyone. And even the next year in 2002, I guess when we did a third year, because the first year was the statue, the second year was the 1 of 1,000, the third year I don't even remember anymore. But I think there was.
I think that was Keldor.
Yeah, it was Keldor. Okay. Yeah. So by the third year, we had a ticket system.
Yeah.
We had that whole thing. Actually, I'm looking at Ted because I think that that's where I met you. Yeah. So yeah, that was cool. That was really cool.
It's amazing. I mean, we've been going to San Diego Comic-Con for so long, and it's to the point now where every year, just like I think like everybody else, we just talk about how much it's changed, and it goes from then where there was no exclusives to everything's exclusives now, and we always talk about that first year that the statue was being sold. The big guest at Comic-Con, just to put things in perspective, was Elizabeth from the second season of Survivor was signing trading cards, and that was the big news that year.
That was huge that year.
Well, these guys were signing autographs left and right, though. That was cool.
That
cool.
was
Yeah, we had us on the stage.
yeah. I mean, it was full 8-hour days of signing, and there was one year when the air conditioner went out in the convention center,
Remember that?
Yeah.
No,
and that was
Oh my
That
God!
was
You know
brutal.
why I remember that? All right, sorry. I remember that because we also now had split the booth into 4, and one of the parts of the booth that we had was DC, and there was the character. So Batman, who looked a little bit like Batman. Okay, I don't even know why I'm saying this, but I'm gonna just go ahead and say it. So Batman, I guess, was sweating around right here. So internally at the Mattel booth, we were calling him Sweaty Tats Bat. So pretty much, it was a big disaster. We had to pull him off the floor. Sweaty Tats Bat he was a real problem.
And unfortunately, that is time. So,
Really?
yeah, I just got the signal from Val that I'm supposed to stop, but I was like, I gotta let that last story out. So we didn't get to see this and talk about it. Sorry about it. Okay, thank you.
That's
Or that one.
Zodak.
We're done.
Oh.
Thank you.